You know, I'm going to just go back and tell you a little story about Andrew McCutchen. Andrew McCutchen, back in 2009, some of those team physicians of your Pittsburgh Pirates, very dear friends of mine, Doc Pat DeMeo, of course, the head of the Orthopedic Institute, and Dr. Eddie Snell, and DJ Phillips, and so many of these other guys have been, like Humpty Dumpty, putting me back together again every single time I fall off that wall. They do incredible work, but, we would have these conversations all the time when they would be down at spring training, and that's where they spent the majority of, February and March doing a lot of work, but they would get a little sunshine and a little pool time in between, and that's when we would get caught up on the phone. So every year I'd be asking Pat DeMeo, because I'm such a Pirate fan. I love my Pirates. Can't wait for Pirate Fest. Already, I must tell you, the last couple of days, how I've been beating the winter doldrums. I've been watching the MLB Network, and sadly, the passing of Ricky Henderson has been the majority of it, but it's all about baseball, and I've been watching all these incredible interviews with some of my childhood heroes and the great Bob Costas, and I love baseball, but I really get into baseball now and into January when the weather's bitterly cold, start thinking about spring training and all the years of covering the Pirates and loving it. But I remember one year, after years of getting nothing really to get excited about, a couple of guys, including Dr. Mayo, said, there's this kid, I think's really going to be the next face of the Pirates. And I'm like, that's a bold statement. I mean, come on, we've had some great, like Stargell and Clemente and Bonds and all these names. And I said, well, who? He said he's about 5'9". He's not real big, but man, he can run, he can hit, he can throw. I'm saying, is he the real deal? And Dr. Mayo got very quiet on the other end of the phone, and he went, he's the real deal. That real deal was Andrew McCutchen. And anytime you can make a deal with a guy who's been in the league for 16 years, for $5 million for 1 year, that's a good deal for both sides. And what Andrew McCutchen does, he keeps that locker room thinking positive, moving forward. Got this Horowitz guy now coming in to play first base. I'm pumped. We still have Mitch Keller and Paul Skeens. Watching this thing with Olivia Dunn the other day, doing a little bit of a commercial for something, and all I'm thinking is just take care of that guy of yours, okay? We just got to get him back to spring training healthy and get him back on the mound. Look, I'm an eternal optimist. And it's hard. I get beat up all the time because I won't go the deep dive or in the rabbit hole on the Pirates. Look, what you have to understand, you got to make money. You got to make money in any business, okay? And I do believe when I look at Brian Hayes and Brian Reynolds, and Mitch Keller, he has spent money, a lot of money. But he's a smart business guy, too. And he understands you got to make sure you have cash flow. Even Warren Buffett talks about cash flow. Cash is king. You got to have some cash. We're lucky in Pittsburgh to have this historic franchise. And for those of us who grew up listening to KDK and the crack of the bat and get your hot dogs here, spring training, all of the you could feel the sunshine through the radio, right? You couldn't wait to see the Pirates return to Pittsburgh for another year. We still have them, still a lot of optimism, and you got a young baseball team. And you got a manager who's starting to learn as he goes. He's still young. You got a general manager who's had success at different levels, and now he's ready to take that leap of faith. But don't give me this thing that the Pirates don't spend money. Don't give me this thing that the Pirates don't make it a great fan experience. And we've got announcers that are a part of our fabric, the landscape. One of the things that the MLB Network was doing over the last 24 hours, they were showing some of the great announcers in the history of the game. People like Vin Scully, okay? Basically like a soundtrack of baseball. And I was thinking, boy, I wish they would do something on Lanny. I wish they would do something on Bob Prince. And I'm watching and I'm like, okay, I got to get going. Then I'd channel surf and I'd go back for the next one and the next one and the next one. Do you realize we here in Pittsburgh have been blessed to have some of the greatest baseball announcers of all time? Bob Uecker, they did something on Bob Uecker, and I found this fascinating. All the things that Uecker was talking about, now in his 90s, still doing that thing, right? He talked about his first year when he broke into the league. Milo Hamilton was the guy that really showed him the ropes. Look, I remember when Milo came in for a short time here in Pittsburgh. He was great. He really was. Bob Prince, it wasn't good how he left the first time, but he did get a chance to come back in the early 80s, and that's when I kind of rolled into KDKA. And you got to realize Bob Prince was in our household as much as my own father's voice. That's how much these games meant to us. And then we roll into the legend of Lanny Ferteri. Still one of the best play-by-play baseball men of all time. And you can ask any of my colleagues who know more about it than I do. He was great. But then this guy who at one time was the Pirate Parrot, who took us into the modern era, Greg Brown, and then Joe Block, The Rock, the great Bob Walk, who probably could have been a manager in Major League Baseball. And my producer, Cal Fraunheiser, how ironic is this? He's the biggest Baltimore Orioles fan I've ever met. And I respect him for that. Look, I was watching this thing last night, and they were showing Ukes Hall of Fame induction ceremony. And Cal, you'll appreciate this. I was brought to tears. Why? Because of one person they flashed to in the crowd, the great Brooks Robinson. You have to understand, as much as those battles with the Baltimore Orioles gave us 2 World Series in 71, 79, Jim Palmer, Belanger, Blair, I love the Baltimore Orioles. Earl Weaver, I love that fire. Reminded me a lot of Jimmy Leland. We're so fortunate to have the Pittsburgh Pirates, one of the most historic franchises in the history of the game. And look, there were times I would make appointments with Dr. Mayo and Doc Snell and them over there on Federal Street, the north side, just so I could get caught up on what was happening with the Pirates. Couldn't wait for them to get back from spring training. I'm all about that ballpark experience and that ballpark hot dog and a cold beer. And I must tell you, great story to leave you with as we get ready to move into the holidays. 1-800-BUY-BUCKS. I'm talking all about saving Pittsburgh, talking about, spending money locally, doing things in the community. Look, the best thing you can do as a Pirate fan is go buy some tickets. And you don't have to be behind home plate. PNC Park, no matter what anyone says, is still the best ballpark in America. It's got the best name. And more importantly, if it wasn't for Kevin McClatchy and others back in the day, we wouldn't be celebrating the Pirates in Pittsburgh. And I know many of you think, it would never happen. Well, what do we talk about all the time in the way of manufacturing? I go back to the early 80s when I would have these guys doing a bump in a beer telling me, it'll never leave. J&L's here forever. It's not going anywhere. Crucible Steel in Midland, it's not going anywhere. American Bridge, well, come on, they're not going to leave. Well, they all left, okay? But Kevin McClatchy put his money where his mouth was, did everything, spent some of his family fortune in the newspaper industry to make it happen. And the great Jim Rohr, who I consider one of the smartest financial minds that this region has ever known, got PNC Bank involved. And, man, it was a match made in baseball heaven, that field of dreams. And build it, they will come, and they did. And people still do to this day. We still get good crowds. If you've never been down to the ballpark on Federal Street on a Sunday, you don't know what you're missing out on. But here's that story. So back in the day when we had the ball games on KDKA radio, when I was working the evening shift like I do now, we could actually scoot over to the ballpark if they were playing at home and catch a couple of innings, come back. We did a little post-game show. So Jose Vizcaino of the Mets was batting. So I roll into the park, and I figure, I got an hour or two. Let me throw back a couple ice-cold irons, right? So I get these 2 beers, and you know how you go, excuse me. You shimmy to the seat that you have picked. And literally, with these 2 beers in my hand, one for my friend, one for me, I'm just about ready to put my seat on the seat, and I hear, all right, that's fouled off, because I'm looking right at Lanny, and I got the little earbuds in with the transistor radio, so that tells you how long ago this was. I mean, this ball's coming right at me. It's a rocket. And I'm no athlete. This was a miracle from God above. I literally handed the beer to my buddy. Left hand went up, snatched that ball out of the air. And what did Lanny Fratteri take from that amazing play that night at PNC Park? Pratt's 2-fisting it tonight. So it's something for everyone. Baseball, memories, and whatever that memory may be. And when I was a kid growing up, Spalding baseball, Wilson glove, and a pack of baseball cards in which the gum was so stale that after you had about 2 or 3, it was off to the dentist because you lost a couple of fillings. But every single experience of baseball in my life has been joyful. And to have Andrew McCutchen coming back for another year to get young people an opportunity to see what I was told over, almost 20 years ago now. I mean, it's really flying by. This guy's the real deal. And not only was he the real deal and still is on the field, still putting up pretty good numbers, now in his mid-30s, pushing towards that 4th decade, he's a really good human being, too. Good father, good husband, And as far as I'm concerned, this may be the best money that the Nutting family has ever spent. All right, stay with us. We got lots to get to, some of the big headlines of the day, including why Harrisburg's got to get a little bit more thrifty when it comes to checks that they're writing money for that they just don't have. All of that and more ways to save Pittsburgh and the community we call home by getting out and putting some of your hard-earned money where it counts in those local restaurants, in those local shopping plazas. And yes, a story of the mall industry and why we are all going to be called upon to save that as well, because every single one of those malls is like a city or a community with 1,000 people.